A case of mistaken identity led to the very first Christmas hit recorded by one of the greats. This is the story of Here Comes Santa Claus by Gene Autry.
Behind the Christmas hits with Drew Savage.
In order to tell the proper story of the song, we really need to paint a picture of just who Gene Autry was and where his life was in 1946 when the song was written. Gene was born in Tioga, Texas, a very small town, one that, as of 2022, only had about 1,200 residents, so you can imagine how small it was when Gene was born there in 1907. His family moved to Oklahoma in the 20s, and that's where he started playing guitar. Following high school, his day job was working as a telegraph operator, but at nights and on weekends he'd play at local dances and for travelers at the local train station. Today, you never know who you're going to see passing through an airport, but in the 1920s and 30s, you never knew who you'd see at a train station. And one night while singing, Autry was approached by a stranger who told him he had way too much talent to be playing local spots. He needed to be on the radio. That stranger was humorist and vaudeville performer Will Rogers. Gene followed Will's advice, and in 1934, Autry landed on WLS, a radio station in Chicago, and appeared on one of the most successful shows of the era, National Barn Dance. Millions of Americans and Canadians would tune in every week. If you appeared on Barn Dance, you became a star. Autry was a good-looking guy who could ride a horse and sing. It wasn't long after the Barn Dance appearance that he signed a contract with Mascot Pictures and started in the movies. He wasn't Hollywood's first singing cowboy, but he was one of the most successful. Between 1934 and 1955, Gene Autry appeared in 93 movies. Some stars resent being typecast into certain roles for certain audiences. Autry did not. He loved it. Loved being what he felt was a role model for kids. His popularity grew even more in 1941. After the U.S. joined the war following the attack on Pearl Harbor, Autry enlisted in the U.S. Army Air Corps and became a commander in Burma. After playing a hero on screen, Autry became one in real life. Autry was away from show business for almost 4 years. After the war was over and his service had ended, he started to dip his toe back in and was booked to be at the 1946 Santa Claus Lane Christmas Parade in Hollywood. Gene rode in the parade from 1937 to 1941, so now that both he and the parade were back after its wartime hiatus, it was natural for him to return. But how would people react? Ace Collins shares the story in his book, Stories of the Greatest Hits of Christmas, that Autry was overwhelmed by the response of the people who had lined the parade route. Kids were screaming, jumping up and down and pointing their fingers towards him. To get closer to his fans, Gene guided his horse Champion a little closer to the curb, leaned over and said, "Howdy," to one young boy. The boy looked at him blankly, then started frantically pointing at something behind Gene, and that's when he realized who the kids were really screaming for: Santa Claus. Gene was riding just a few spots ahead of St. Nick, but the jolly old elf was clearly visible to the kids eager to see him. The boy then yelled, "Mom, look! Here comes Santa Claus." After the parade, Gene called a composer friend of his named Oakley Halderman and told him the story of how funny it was to hear the boy saying over and over, "Here comes Santa Claus." Halderman said, "Gene, this sounds like a song to me." They got to work, and in a matter of days, they had written what would become Autry's first top 10 song in a decade and reestablished him as a superstar. Fun fact, like so many Christmas hits, you can hear sleigh bells in the background of the song, but that wasn't always the plan. When the demo was being recorded, producer Art Satherley was enjoying a cocktail, and the sound of ice cubes tingling in his glass was inadvertently captured on the recording. They thought it sounded fun, but substituted the ice cubes for real sleigh bells for the recording session on August 28, 1947. Released that December, it sold over 2 million copies. Gene Autry returned to the Santa Claus Lane Parade that year, but this time as Grand Marshal, a role he served in for years. The parade still exists, and for a time was actually owned by Gene Autry. The parade was purchased in 1978 by Los Angeles TV station KTLA. It was owned by Golden West Broadcasters, one of Autry's many companies. That parade still exists, and for a time was owned by Gene Autry. The parade was purchased in 1978 by Los Angeles television station KTLA. It was owned by Golden West Broadcasters, one of Autry's many companies. He wasn't just a singing cowboy. He was an incredibly savvy businessman. The parade was renamed the Hollywood Christmas Parade in hopes of attracting more celebrities. It takes place every year on the Sunday following American Thanksgiving and is still broadcast on television. Over 5,000 people participate in the parade, with 500,000 lining the 3.5-mile route to scream, "Here comes Santa Claus." I'm Drew Savage. Thank you so much for listening. You can find me on Instagram at Drew Savage on air. If you enjoy these stories, we'd really appreciate a 5-star rating, a comment, or a review. It helps other people find the show. And if you click subscribe, you'll never miss a story behind the Christmas hits.